The pagan King Penda in Mercia continued to cause problems to his immediate Christian neighbours until the third showdown between Penda and the new king of Northumbria, King Oswy, at the Battle of Winwade. The monastery at Whitby had only been founded some 7 years earlier by King Oswy, when finally in 655 Oswy defeated Penda, and the way was clear for Christianity under its Celtic missionaries to flourish again in the north, and particularly here in Northumbria. But we've already seen that Christianity in Britain had become complicated by the landing some 60 years earlier, in 597, in Kent, of Augustine, sent by Pope Gregory from Rome. There were two different Christianities, and they were on a collision course, because Oswy had married a Kentish princess, Eanfled, who was brought up in the Roman ways of Christianity, and Oswy had learned his from Iona, based on the original Christian teachings from Glastonbury. And the problems behind the very different ways of calculating the Roman Easter and the Celtic Passover were brought into very sharp focus. King Oswy had completed his quiet weeks of meditation and prayer, and had begun to celebrate in a rather more relaxed and raucous manner, when from the other end of the hall his queen sent a message to ask him to be quieter, because according to the Roman method of calculation, there was still another week to go. Oswy decided to sort out the differences in the doctrines of these two branches of Christianity, and he called a meeting of the leaders of both churches here at Whitby in 664 AD, and the Synod of Whitby has become famous as a turning point in the fortunes of the original British Celtic Christian Church and the Church of Rome in Britain. The Roman delegation was represented by a young monk who was a particularly adept, articulate and zealous advocate by the name of Brother Wilfrid, who argued vociferously against any and all of the teachings of Columba and the original Celtic Christian Church. But it was up to King Oswy to make the final decision, and eventually all the heads turned towards him. Who was the gatekeeper, he said. And all of the monks there replied, St. Peter. Then it has to be Rome. From now on, Rome would dictate the doctrines. There was no attempt at conciliation or involvement with the original British Christian Church, and Rome would continue to exercise unbridled control over the entire Christian community for nearly 1,000 years. It's perhaps an interesting coincidence that it was about the same time as Augustine landed in Britain that reservations began to be expressed about the doctrines of the Roman Church in the Middle East by a certain Muhammad, who founded Islam. But that's another story. The monastery founded by King Oswy was destroyed by the Danes in the middle of the 9th century. The present building was begun by a Norman soldier who came across with William the Conqueror. He subsequently became a monk, and when he moved back here in 1070, began to build what was to become the abbey that we see behind me. Since the Romans had left, the British Isles had divided themselves into, broadly speaking, 9 different areas. The Picts and the Scots were north of Hadrian's Wall. The Celts had been pushed south and west, and now occupied Wales, Cornwall and Ireland. The Angles and the Jutes were the more friendly newcomers who'd been invited to live in and help to defend the shores of East Anglia and Kent, and the remaining areas Northumbria, Mercia and Wessex were occupied by the increasingly integrated Roman and Saxon groups with either pagan or Christian roots. Little kings fighting with each other to defend, maintain or expand their little kingdoms. Invariably, one of these kings would achieve dominance over the others. And during the second half of the 8th century, it was the Christian King Offa of Mercia who subjugated Wessex, Kent, and parts of East Anglia. But in spite of all those conquests, he couldn't subjugate the Welsh, so he's probably best remembered for building Offa's Dyke to keep them out. An earthwork 176 miles long, defining the border at that time between Mercia and Wales. I'm climbing up the bank with difficulty from the Welsh side, where there's the ditch and the steep hill. On the English side, it's very much easier. The course this enormous structure takes has been very carefully selected. From the top, wherever you stand, you can see into Wales for miles and miles and miles. From the Welsh side, you're simply looking up the hill. You can't see anything beyond the rampart, and until the Welsh got to the top of the hill, they would never have known how many English there were the other side to meet their incursion. Another testament to the power and prestige of Offa at that time is the number of coins that have been found bearing his inscription. Offa reigned from 757 to 796. But shortly after his death, the supremacy of Mercia gave way to that of Wessex, when the Witan Agemo elected Egbert as his successor. The Witan Agemo is literally a council of wise men. The Saxons had maintained the traditional Celtic method of tanistry, whereby the person considered to be the most suitable in the community is selected as the next king. Always a man, and generally chosen from the nobility because of education, but regardless of family and with no automatic right to inherit a kingdom. And it was Egbert who brought Wessex to a permanent position of supremacy over Mercia, to the extent that the King of Wessex would eventually be regarded as the King of all England. And it is that tanistry system of succession we have to thank for bringing us Alfred the Great, at a time when Britain faced one of its worst ever and most successful foreign invasions. Alfred was Egbert's grandson, and we'll turn our attention to him in just a little while.